I am Dr. Jennifer Okeke, the Vice Chair of the National Women Council. I'd like to welcome you today, and also to our foreign members that are joining us online, and other people that are joining us online. We just want to say good morning. You are all welcome to today's All Ireland Women's Forum panel discussion in the spirit of the agreements and the diverse communities without whom peace will not continue to be maintained. The 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement has been a historic opportunity across Northern Ireland for reflection on the significance of the agreement as a cornerstone of peace on the island of the island. While the achievements of the past can be commended, space is needed for diverse reflection on the success and limitations of the Good Friday Agreement through the lenses of women and people from different communities in the island. And therefore, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today our inspiring panelists. The first speaker I want to introduce to you is Eileen. Eileen has been involved in community development practices for most of her working life, using community development approach in her community relations work. In 2018, Eileen received 2 prestigious awards. The first presented by the Community Relations Council for Exceptional Achievement Award, and the second, the McCloskey Civil Rights Award for her work in human rights, civil rights, and peace-building activities. Eileen, you're welcome.
Okay.
The second lady I'd like to introduce, I have the pleasure, she likes to call herself Made in Belfast, a social entrepreneur, founder of the award-winning training education company called CRAICNI, that cultivates respect, appreciates inclusion and culture. She is passionate about inclusion and diversity, citizens' rights, with extensive experience in racial equality. She loves style and creativity. Eileen, you're welcome this morning. I'd like to welcome Dr. Munyi. Munyi is a gender peace and development specialist. Caroline studied in Kenya, Uganda, and Ireland. Caroline started her career in Kenya and worked on integrated development programs, with funding from Nigeria, working with communities in the remote Eastern Kenya. Caroline came to Ireland and did a BA in development studies in Munyi University. She then went on to Trinity College, where she pursued a master's in philosophy and a PhD in the same. She specialized in the area of masculinity and violence. Here in Ireland, Caroline coordinates projects on female genital mutilation both for AkiDwa and Action Aid Ireland. Currently, she is the coordinator of AkiDwa's Migrant Women's Health Program. Caroline considers herself a feminist, and she believes in looking after herself to continue the struggle for the emancipation of women and girls globally. Caroline, you're welcome this morning.
Thank you.
The next woman I'd like to introduce to you is Nicole Parkinson Kelly. Nicole was born in April 1998, 11 days after the Good Friday Agreement was signed, making her a proud peace baby. She went to integrated primary school and studied social policy at the Ulster University before becoming the vice chair of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. She is passionate and committed to social cohesion, social mobility, community development through the youth and voluntary sector. You're welcome. The last person I'd like to introduce to you this morning is Eilish Rooney. Eilish grew up in Ballymurphy and was educated at St. Rose's Secondary School, Belfast. She went to Queen's University as a mature student and the mother of 2 children. She's a scholar emeritus in the Transitional Justice Institute at Ulster University. Her research involves intersectional lives in conflict and transition. Her current research focuses on constitutional conversation workshops with women in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Eileen, you're welcome this morning. So without further ado, I'd like, first of all, to invite Eileen where. Eileen. Each of our panelists, you have 5 minutes to make your contributions. And it's very important that we stick to the time, please. Eileen, the floor is yours.
Hello. It's great to be here, and I know for anybody that's watching online, quite welcome. And I don't know really where to start. I think I'll start in 1995. Although my journey started 20 years prior to that in 1975. So I have been peace building from 1975. But I became more involved in community in 1995, just before the Good Friday Agreement, when they were starting to talk about a Good Friday Agreement. And coming from the area, I started as a volunteer in Shankill Women's Centre. And at that time, the media wasn't very kind to the Good Friday Agreement, in particular from the unionist community, where one of the unionist parties were in favour of it and the other unionist party was totally against it. So it made our job that much harder to actually convince people of the benefits of a Good Friday Agreement. And I can remember when I was out in community and talking to women at grassroots level, they were saying, look, break it down, because the document, you know, it was put through everybody's door. But the Good Friday Agreement document, you needed a university degree to read it. So people at grassroots level sort of way believed what they were being told by their political parties. So it was the job of myself and others like me throughout the province to break that down into simple terms, the strands, the different strands, and what did these strands mean? You know, you have 3 strands, and to explain the strands and explain the Good Friday Agreement, you know, prior to getting the vote of the Good Friday Agreement, was, you mean, it's like a milking stool. If one of the strands doesn't work, it collapses. So we've had collapsed milking stools over the last 25 years of the Good Friday Agreement because one strand or the other hasn't worked. And then we got community dialogue, I have to say, done an easy read version of it, which we took out to educate women at grassroots level. And we done that. It was an uphill struggle in some points, but as we all know, 71.12% voted in favour of the Good Friday Agreement. And then that caused other problems. And the other problems was looking at what was happening. It looked as if Catholics were getting more than Protestants were getting out of the Good Friday Agreement. So we had then to start looking at why Catholics were getting more than what Protestants were getting out of the Good Friday Agreement. So I used a theory of a scale. And the scale, you know, before the Good Friday Agreement, Protestants were getting a lot of stuff that Catholics weren't getting. So the scales were imbalanced. So before we could actually get any move forward, we had to bring the scale up so everybody were treated equally. And that seemed to go down okay, but still there was that lot of interference by political representation at the time. So the ethos of what we were saying was that the Good Friday Agreement was hope for the future, because people were fed up with the shootings, the bombings, and everything else that was going on. The media and everything that we done within our political arena was all about the conflict, all about the troubles, all about the Good Friday Agreement. But a lot of the things were being left behind, the like of a Bill of Rights, the like of domestic violence against women, all those things were not being talked about or discussed about because politics was about the conflict. I'm still waiting on the words that I told women 25 years ago, that the Good Friday Agreement will give us a fair, a just, and an equal society to live in. And I'm still fighting for those things today. It's the fairness, the just society, and the equal society that I thought the Good Friday Agreement was going to bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I'll now invite Eileen Chan-Hu to come and make your own contributions. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on the Good Friday Agreement and for my perspective. And thank you to the National Women's Committee for having me today on this topic. To those who are joining us online, that I've been pestering to be a part of this because I felt it was important. Thank you. And to those who came actually and drove all the way to URA, thank you again. So how did I reach to this point of standing here today? If I go to 2023 this year, which has been a flash, we're in July. I think the sign's gone up. At the end of March, I was invited to the Abbey Theatre by the minister for the event for the Good Friday Agreement, which was outstanding. It was incredible performances. But when I got there, I realized I was the only one minority ethnic member in the whole audience from the north. And there were two others, I think, from the south. Well, maybe I can't see beyond, you know, from people of color, but that's what I felt. I felt like, goodness, we were all part of the Good Friday Agreement, and why was I the only one? It got to such an embarrassment state that I felt embarrassed to put my pictures up on social media a little bit because I felt I had privilege. And I had to be confident that my privilege had come from my over 25 years experience of working in race relations and good relations and where I've come to today. So with that, I think that's how I talked about this at the Zoom meeting. And I felt, you know, the story about it is, where are we in the Good Friday Agreement as women and from different backgrounds, whatever we are, you know. So I'm really glad that it got onto the working group 1, and under women's representation, the theme is improving the visibility of diversity in the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and hence we're here. So I'm really happy this is now on the table, and that for the next and coming months, we will see more women and more representation from any background. So what I'm talking about is opportunity. And it's that opportunity that sometimes you have to put yourself forward. Me telling my story, getting this on the table today, and hopefully when you hear about the background to this and from my perspectives of the conflict, you'll hear why I think opportunity is so important. So go back from 2023 to 1998, where was I? I had to scratch my head when I watched Dairy Girls and saw everybody jumping for the vote. I wondered, what on earth was I doing? Why did I not vote? So there are two things around that time. I didn't actually understand politics. I was a young community development worker and just recently married. And my child came the year after, a bit of Nicole's age. So I'm thinking, wow, this girl is smart. She had to talk to my son here. So that's what had happened. I wasn't quite there. Although Mo Molan had a visit to the Chinese Welfare Association, and she's the only one I remember in that peace process that came and met minority ethnic groups. She talked to us, and she did leave an impression, because I remember watching the documentary years later and thinking, wow, this woman is fantastic. So that's my memory of not voting. So we need more people to vote. And 2 is the lack of understanding. So maybe in 1998, although I started my journey into community development work, I didn't understand it well. So where we came to and years later, the conflict comes with many understand the Good Friday Agreement. Eileen's talked about the strands, but I know it as the decommissioning, the normalization, the prisoner release, and finally the equality and human rights aspects. Where we minority ethnic communities come in, unfortunately, is around racism and sectarianism. Post 1998, the number of incidents rose incredibly. I was a member of the Chinese community, and I do remember when Simon Tang was murdered during that time. That was 1996, just 2 years before the peace process. But for the years after, there was almost an incident every week on the Chinese community, unreported or reported or not listened to. And until Stephen Lawrence inquiry came, we didn't have the definition on it. So this brings us to the point of, we know that the figures that are shown by PSNI this year says 2023, there were 1,238 sectarian incidents, but there were 1,221 racist incidents. So we aren't that much behind in incidents, but the proportion of minority ethnic communities is still very small in Northern Ireland. So therefore, there's a higher ratio of people facing racist attacks. The Good Friday Agreement, for me, I know I've only a couple of minutes left, has the importance of Section 75, where we can tackle inequalities. That came from the Northern Ireland Act. I have to say, it's one of my most favorite pieces, but not used well. It has become a tick box exercise, and it has not been implemented. If we did follow the actions of it, much more could be seen amongst the different inequality groups, including women and race. So finally, for myself, coming from the Dairy Girls, not voting to where we are today, what I would like to see is the space in society to take this opportunity to have more women in leadership, that I can retire, that I not be standing here the next time and somebody else speaks on my behalf or advocates. And I hope that the groups that are so busy working on the grassroots work can lead up to those roles. I'm in a luckier position today. My kids have grown up. My boys are now early 20s, late 18, and I can stand here with a bit more time. But if you think back to 1998, I was running around like all the other groups then, and no time and not understanding legislation or structure. So we need more women. We need those actions in Section 75 and the public sector in the South to be implemented, not a tick box. And finally, racism and isms should be ruled out. It's a big no. And that's the way to achieve peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Thank you very much. Dr. Caroline, I'd like to invite you to make your contributions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want first and foremost to thank the National Women's Council for having this event to celebrate the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement, and especially that bit about making space for diversity. Because the first speaker said something very, very important, that 25 years ago, when the Good Friday Agreement was born, was coming into being, there were no discussions about the racial issues, about the new woman in Ireland, because I personally, I consider myself a very, very proud Irish woman. There were no discussions about that woman. And looking at AkiDwa, where I work with women who are coming from conflict zones. So just think about 25 years ago and those women. And also looking at myself, that time, 25 years ago in 1998, I was in Kenya and I was a small girl and I was hearing things in the news and I was hearing names, Bill Clinton, Betty Ahan, and it was on a small radio this size, and Tony Blair and what was going on. And so you can imagine And then I happened to find myself here working for AkiDwa, working with migrant women, coordinating health issues. And it's not just the physical health, but also mental health, and looking at all the other issues which make up health, and also in the context of peace. Because when you look at what we call the social determinants of health, it's about also the community. The community is very, very important for our mental well-being. And then we look at the Good Friday Agreement and what it promised to all the women of Ireland, and the new Irish woman who was not who did not make part of the discussions at that time. And when you talk about diversity, it's about getting that woman heard. It's about giving her a place on the table. And I always tell that woman that if you go to the table and the table has all the chairs and everyone is seated, carry your own and make space. And then so we need to give space to that woman so that she can participate, because it's also about participation. When we look at what it entails, like when we look at women, peace and security, it's not just about protection and prevention and relief and recovery. It's also about making sure that people participate, that their voice is heard and the issues are heard. Because especially for those women who are coming from conflict zones, you can imagine the profound psychosocial consequences of conflicts. They are huge, and these women, they need to be, their vulnerabilities are special and they need to be addressed. So let's continue thinking about what happened 25 years ago, because that promised a lot for all the women who call Ireland home today, and even who are going to call Ireland home in the future. And so like, I'm so happy for this conversation we are having here today. And at AkiDwa, we are doing our bit in trying to make that reality, to make peace for many women in Ireland a reality. And we have a project we call Women Together for a Better World. And what that project does, what we are doing in that project, we bring Irish indigenous women and women coming from the South, the global South, to have a conversation. And what we have seen that there are a lot of commonalities when we come together as women and we talk. You'll be amazed about the commonalities which are there, and so which we need to embrace. And so thank you so much for having me here, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caroline. Your contribution is really appreciated, especially highlighting the issue of women coming from the global South into Ireland, and the fact that some of them are also coming from conflict zones. I'd like now to invite Nico. Nico, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, hello everybody. Really delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the perspective of young people growing up in a world with the Good Friday Agreement. So as it was said at the start, I'm a peace baby. I'm 25 years old. Me and the Good Friday Agreement both hit that number this year. I grew up with a background with parents who were in a mixed marriage, which up here in the north means basically my father was a Catholic and my mum was a Protestant, which provided its own challenges for them throughout their lives. But for me, it was a very positive thing throughout my childhood, especially with the introduction of integrated education as a result from the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I went to Bridge Integrated Primary School, which was established back in 1987. And that was prior to the Good Friday Agreement, where there was appetite for that social cohesion, that mixing, that inclusion from the outset. And of course, the name itself, Bridge Integrated Primary School, not only was a wordplay on the fact that I grew up in Banbridge, but also the fact that it was bridging societies in a divided community. But it definitely set, I suppose, my big core passion about social cohesion and inclusion and integration. And that led me into the youth sector. Now, I've been very privileged. I grew up in a mixed area. I had a very comfortable background, at least from the outset. And not all young people have had the same opportunities that I've had. You know, there's a lot of young people are still living in divided communities and societies today with pressures from paramilitary groups and violence on their doorstep. I was lucky to not have to experience any of that. They're often stuck as well in echo chambers where they're seeing the same rhetoric. They're not having the opportunity to be exposed to what other young people think and to formulate their own independent opinions. But at the same time, there's a safety in what's the same. So there are young people that enjoy growing up in a community where their sports are played and their languages are spoken and everybody has very similar views as well. So that's worth calling out too. So what we really need to do as a society is take a step forward and create safety and in a shared community, in an integrated community where culture isn't diluted, but celebrated. So yes, I joined the Northern Ireland Youth Forum back in June 2021, and we've hosted a couple of really major events this year for the Good Friday Agreement. These dialogues were looking at how the Good Friday Agreement has impacted young people. So we did talk about poverty and youth voice. We talked about peace building, inclusion and diversity, housing and homelessness, and education. And under peace building, one of the key findings that I found really important was that young people feel the need to be included and to have a voice on how we reflect on the past and how we move forward. When we asked young people, what does peace mean to them? They said, and before we go into this list, I really want you to think if we have actually achieved that peace based on what their responses were. They said that peace was an end of violence. It was a peaceful society, the removal of paramilitary influence, being respectful and welcoming, a functioning assembly without insults and instability, putting our differences aside, with young people being listened to and our rights being protected, promoting integration beyond just education, looking at our communities and our housing as well, and being able to speak your mind without judgment. And to continue, I suppose, building on our peaceful society, we also talked about things that we wanted to keep and things we wanted to change. And some of the things that they wanted to keep, they listed, was around youth voice and youth councils and voluntary youth provisions and the youth parliament. But something else they also mentioned was to keep our devolved government too. And that's probably because of how special and how unique our circumstances are here in the North. But some of the things they wanted to change was really radical and really exciting to hear. They wanted to see inclusive uniform policies. They wanted to see a change of the presence of paramilitary murals and symbols and flags. They wanted to see multiple language street signs. They wanted to see modern and inclusive education with youth participation in government decisions. They wanted to see less violence and shooting by appointment and punishment shootings. The fact that that came up in conversation shows that that still exists to this day. They wanted to see community support for the LGBTQIA community. They also wanted to see more English language classes, student rights and education, mental health support, which is so vital in a transgenerational trauma community where our parents are living with the memories of the troubles, but our young people are suffering the impacts of transgenerational trauma, never mind the normal mental illness that does exist in society and needs to be catered to, addressed, dealt with as well. They also called for votes at 16 and a political education to understand our society better and a curriculum that prepares us better for life. And they also called for stricter laws on women's safety as well. So just to wrap up, I think something that really was poignant for me as well was that young people identified that there needs to be an understanding of the past and of our history. And that's so important to be able to enact change for our future. We physically cannot create a positive future without reflecting on the mistakes and reflecting on the challenges of our past. So in order for us to step forward together, we need to make sure that we include young people in that discussion from the outset. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. That was really very insightful. And I wish we had more time to hear all the other things you had to say. But we'll have time for questions. I'd like now to call on Eileen to come and make her own contribution.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everybody. I want to join the youth forum. It's happening there. I'm delighted to be here, and I feel it's a privilege and also a responsibility to make a contribution today. And my feeling is that there's not enough local conversations network conversations, exchanges about the Good Friday Agreement. Indeed, as I was thinking about this presentation today, I was wondering, is the Good Friday Agreement on any curriculum, north or south? Is it ever discussed? Can we have Eileen's easy read version printed, please, and make it available to young people today? Because to understand where we are, I think we really need to understand the Good Friday Agreement, which is as old as Nicole. It's a precious copy. And in my few words today, I want to address 4 things. The title I've given myself is "The Spirit of the Good Friday Agreement Lives in its Language." I'll come back to that again and again. So I want to say a few words about language in the Good Friday Agreement. Then I want to say something about implementation. Civil society is my next topic. And finally, future language and lives. So to go back to the beginning, the language of the Good Friday Agreement, allow me to make a statement from the opening declaration that's in the agreement. The tragedies of the past have left a deep and profoundly regrettable legacy of suffering. We must never forget those who have died or been injured and their families. But we can best honour them through a fresh start in which we firmly dedicate ourselves to the achievement of reconciliation, tolerance and mutual trust, and to the protection and vindication of the human rights of all. We signed up to that statement across this island. The statement is alive. It is not well in as much as it's not realised, but it is there. And I think the language of the agreement, to go back to it, to read it, to restate it, is really important, I think, in almost in all that we do these days. So language, my first few comments. Words hard won. In the section on rights, safeguards and equality of opportunity, we have this commitment to the human rights of the right to equal opportunity in all social and economic activity, regardless of class, creed, disability, gender, or ethnicity. Diversity is built into the language of the agreement. It doesn't have to be introduced. We don't have to critique it for being missing. It's in the language. Makes a commitment to women, to the right of women to full and equal political participation. The right to equal opportunity was legislated for in the Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act. And it made it a statutory obligation on public bodies, public authorities in Northern Ireland to carry out all their functions with due regard to the need to promote equality of opportunity in relation to religion, political opinion, gender, race, disability, age, marital status, dependence, and sexual orientation. Now that's been mentioned before at the panel, the Section 75 obligations. Under economic, social and cultural issues, the British government promised to pursue broad policies for sustained economic growth and stability in Northern Ireland for promoting social inclusion, including in particular community development and the advancement of women in public life. This language, these commitments are made in the agreement. But what we really need to look at 25 years later is how were they implemented? How were they realised? What happened on the journey from then to here? I've just got a flash up that I have to finish. I can't believe it. I can't believe everybody didn't use up their 5 minutes. So implementation. I've called these thoughts on this part of the page, ambiguity and enforceability. This was a binding international treaty between 2 sovereign states. It had no conflict resolution mechanism. There was no international forum for considering disputes around interpretation, obligations that bind the issues to the agreement that was agreed. There's no external body that you can go to. There was no redress for failure to implement economic, social and cultural rights. There was no international court to arbitrate. Now that structure was missing from the Good Friday Agreement. Subsequent agreements have learned from that. Rights protections in the peace agreement were novel at the time. They were hard won. There was deep and profound disagreement. Eileen's already referred to it. So it's not that it was, we look back on it now and we say it lacked this and it lacked that, they should have been there. The language that was there and the commitments that were made were as good as it could get at the time. The public duty in section 75 became a matter of procedure over outcome. Public bodies realized that there was no legal teeth behind the legislation, that they didn't have to actually make a difference. All they had to do was to develop tick boxes, and that was it. I want really to come to civil society. I'm leaving out some stuff because civil society in this past 25-year period has played a crucial, critical, decisive role in the shortcomings of the agreement and its implementation. Solidarity and coalition building networks such as, for example, the Women's Resource and Development Agency's Women's Policy Group, Northern Ireland COVID-19 Feminist Recovery Plan. What happened in those 25 years is that the promise of the agreement, if you like, became sedimented into civil society groups. They took on responsibility for women's rights, for health, for ethnicity, equality, you know, for all of those promises that were made in the agreement. What we find is that organizations such as the Human Rights Consortium, made up of 160 organizations, the Equality Coalition, made up of 100 organizations and trade unions, Committee on the Administration of Justice, these bodies became the bodies that started to chase, if you like, the institutions to deliver. And they had some successes, not enough, but they had some successes. They were dependent on funding, of course, and on funding that was sometimes related to government funding. I want to end very quickly on where we are today with further words from the agreement. So the participants at the talks and in the agreement endorsed the commitment made by the British and Irish governments that they will recognise the legitimacy of whatever choice is freely exercised by a majority of the people in Northern Ireland with regard to its status, whether they prefer to continue to support the union with Great Britain or a sovereign united Ireland. They recognise that it is for the people of the island of Ireland alone, by agreement between the two parts respectively and without external impediment, to exercise their right of self-determination on the basis of consent freely given. Now, the reason I'm ending with those words is because we've been alerted to the fact since 2016 that the post-Brexit and political environment and constitutional environment has encouraged conversations about constitutional change and about reviving this commitment that's in the agreement. And I think it's no small matter that the failure to implement the promise of the agreement has fueled this conversation and has encouraged people to think of another way forward. In that other way forward, we have to bring the lessons from the Good Friday Agreement and its language into any further conversations in future. And it's a future that's a long way away, I think, a future of reunification of the island. But it's a future that needs to include commitments that are deliverable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eileen, for that amazing contribution. Because of the constraints of time, which is partly our fault because we didn't start exactly when we were meant to, we would like to go straight to Q&A. So if you have any question, and also we might I don't know, are we taking from anyone from online? Okay, that's fine. If you have a question, please indicate, they'll bring the mic to you. And you introduce yourself and if you're part of an organization. But more importantly is to keep it very short. Keep it to 1 minute if you can, please. Okay.
Thanks very much. I'm gonna ask you, Eilish, if that's okay. Just you mentioned the, I suppose the lack of structures around sort of monitoring the socio-economic development and how crucial that is for maintaining peace. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that and if some of the other panelists might have something to say about that. I mean, particularly from the young person's perspective, from the working class perspective.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Patterns of inequality and poverty and social exclusion have not changed since the days of the Good Friday Agreement. So that, the anti-poverty strategy that was promised hasn't been delivered. Section 75, whenever I first read the legislation, I thought it would make a difference if it was enforced with energy and commitment by public bodies. I really did believe that legislation naming categories of persons that we all fit into to ensure that any policy would recognize any disadvantage to those categories of people. I really believed that that would change policy, would radically change policy in Northern Ireland, and it would result in the benefit of the most marginalized people. Because if you look at the first two categories, it's political belief and religion. So that if you tackled social policy on the basis of adverse impacts on people from different political allegiances, if you like, that was bound to shift inequalities at the most disadvantaged level. Didn't happen. It hasn't happened. The poverty strategy wasn't brought into being, and that hasn't been tackled. So that, in a longer version of my paper, some of what I go into is what happened to the institutions that were set up, to the assembly that was set up. And what happened was that because of a right of objection that was located in the in government, the introduction of policies became, if you like, a battle a day, such that the two main parties, the Republicans and the Unionists, started to settle things, sometimes important things, to settle things without argument, or not to bring things to the table that they knew they couldn't make any progress on. And poverty is one of those. And as a result of that, we have neglected the inequalities in Northern Ireland. I think, I also think that fact has encouraged hopes and aspirations for a unity outlook that might solve all problems. But of course, that's not the case. You have poverty in the 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland, serious poverty that is neglected as well. And, how do you move from a situation where that's a priority? And I think that's a priority for a number of the networks and women's organizations. But no progress, very little progress has been made. And in fact, for children in Northern Ireland, poverty is a dire experience.
Thank you, Eilish. Thank you very much. And there's one more person here in the audience. Please really encourage our panelists to keep your response to 1 minute, so that we can take as much question as we possibly can. Thank you.
It's just picking up on some of Eilish's points there. There's also a massive unrealized aspect of the 1998 Act.
You didn't tell us your name.
Oh, sorry, Nuala Toman from Disability Action. So Section 28A of the 1998 Act actually allows for resources to be targeted on the basis of objective need. There was a legal case taken, and in Justice Tracy's ruling, he not only pointed towards the need for an anti-poverty strategy, but noted that actually there is a statutory duty to allocate resources on the basis of objective need, and that has never been realised. And as a result, communities continue to struggle, children, disabled people. And I guess what I would like to see is the unrealised business moved forward for the better of all. Like at the minute, I was speaking to Patty Kelly from the Children's Law Centre yesterday, and what she said to me was, you know, and just to listen to her words, you know, she said, you know, Thatcher's times were rough. They took the milk. Now they're back for the hedge and the cow. And that was how she described what we're facing at the minute in the north, where our public services and community provision is being picked apart. And we're at a real crisis point. And just quickly on the issue of integrated education, I think we also need to talk about integrated education differently. So it's about integrating all communities and integrating disabled people, because you know, I suppose we're looking at all aspects of the agreement, actually extending beyond how it was written at that point in time. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think okay, there's one more question. Okay.
Hello, my name is Paula McCalliskey from Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network. I have a question for Eileen Chan-Hu. Eileen, you said you'd like to be able to retire at some stage if people would come up behind you. I'm just wondering, are there many people coming up behind you from the Chinese community or from the wider ethnic community? And if not, in an increasingly diverse society, how do you address that? How do you get people involved in or to be interested in this?
Well, I mean, my forerunner before was Anna Lowe, and you know, I took on her position after she went into politics. I did have a go at standing in politics myself, being a former Quality Commissioner. So Lillian Snell Barr is up in Derry in the Northwest Migrants Forum and councillor for SDLP. One of my after school club members, not female, male, is in the Lions Party as councillor. I'm extremely proud of that, because I was, you know, his after school club teacher at the time, which was, you know, looking at promoting English. But behind me, yeah, there are brilliant women out there. I know Anna Peters may be watching this on the screen. Mimi is at Bakomo, and Anna is with BAWA, the Belfast Asian Women's work. But I think is happening is that they're just doing the groundwork at the minute, and there are so many issues coming in, not dissimilar from what was happening with the Chinese community 20, 30 years ago. I don't like using the word newcomer at all. I'm sorry, so I'm not going to put it that way, but that's what people understand. I'm just saying, with communities coming in that aren't part of the host community, there are many issues on the ground that need to be faced and worked on. But for those who maybe said, not settled neither, in the traditional communities like Chinese, Indian, they may be second, third, fourth generation born. As I said, my son is Nicole's age, but we're not there. So I think what I said at the point of my talk was the opportunity. And as a woman myself going through all the years, it is hard to take that opportunity. It's given to you. If you're listening out there and watching this, please take it. Even if you're just watching the seminar, maybe 20 years later, it'll be realized. I give you an example. When I was 18, I was brought to an education conference by the Quality Commission to speak on my experiences of being at school and brought up here. I didn't imagine 30 odd years later being a Quality Commissioner. So, you know, it is those little tiny opportunities. Somebody has to give you a hand up. Mine was my youth leader, coordinator at Chinese Welfare, a local woman, actually, Eleanor Knight. So if I can do this for somebody else, that's what I mean. So if you're asking, at the minute present, not ready yet. It's a lot of capacity building needs to be done, but that's amongst all groups. And Eileen's version from Community Dialogue needs to be given out again, everyone.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Just to read out a statement that was sent from one of our online participants. Traveler women still experience inequalities in terms of education, employment, life expectancy. Traveler women experience double of burden of racism, discrimination, and sexism. And what it kind of ties into what the majority of what our panelists have talked about, because whether you listen to any of our panelists, what you hear is the need for that diverse voices, the need for that inclusion. That is what I'm getting this morning, and the importance of those diverse voices being part of this. And that brings me to you, Eileen. I'd like to ask you a question. You mentioned in your contribution, Eileen, where? I meant that yourself. You mentioned in your contribution that there were political interferences in achieving equality at the time. My question is, do you find that this is still the case today? Or has there been changes? Have you seen changes from those kind of political interferences you mentioned? Please, we'll try to keep it to 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. So that, thank you.
She got 3. You know, we keep putting down what hasn't happened with the Good Friday Agreement and what hasn't worked, and it hasn't, and we still need that implementation of that document in the spirit of that document. But what I'm saying is there's a bigger divide between the classes now that we didn't have 25 years ago. Keep calling the working class. The working class is now, we're not even getting the wages that we deserve at grassroots level and working class areas. And the thing that frustrates me probably more is when I see the richer getting rich and the poor getting poorer. Is that a just society? Is that an equal society? And because of the work that of community organizations, and not just women's organizations, there's youth organizations and a lot of other organizations out there for the last 25 years have kept pace. It hasn't been our government that has kept pace or our politicians that has kept pace. It has been the grassroots workers right across the whole province, right across the 6 counties. And we have different areas. We have the urban and we have the rural, but it's the organizations within those areas that actually have kept pace to allow tourism to have profits, to allow businesses to have profits. If there was no pace, we wouldn't have the tourism. If there was no pace, we wouldn't have the new businesses coming here to settle, which I welcome, but then we need to share in that because it's us who have made that happen at grassroots level. So I'll let you answer that question yourself. I just think I'm not getting what I actually fought for and voted for. All those years ago. But in saying that, the Good Friday Agreement has done good work for me at grassroots level. And I'm going to tell this story. And I've told this story every time I've heard it. And I only heard it last Wednesday. And I must have told it every time I've spoke to somebody from last Wednesday. What it has done for me working at grassroots level was, you have to remember, women's centres were going 10 years before, 15 years before. I think Falls is celebrating their 40th anniversary this year. And Shankle's not that far behind that. So you have to remember all those years from, say, 85 to 98, we were already building relationships. We already had those relationships across the communities. And I mean all communities. I just don't mean the orange and green. because I think that's where politicians fall down, because our society has moved on and they need to look at that. But we had to do an awful lot of work under the radar. All our work was done under the radar because it wasn't safe to do anything different. So from the Good Friday Agreement, 75% of my work now I can do openly, but there's still that 25% that I have to do under the radar. But I had my network meeting last week, and I told this yesterday, so anybody that was there yesterday, please forgive me, Eileen, for repeating myself. I had 18 groups affiliated with the network across Greater North Belfast, and there's some regional groups involved in that as well. And we were going around after our network meeting, and I get a feedback from each group to see what's happening in their area, see if they need support, if there's anything that the network can do for them, is there any issues, any problems. So we goes round the table and we come to the last one, and this is a woman of 72 years of age who's a volunteer who runs a women's group, but she also took the bonfires off paramilitaries 10 years ago, and she won't allow the paramilitaries to actually come in to take over their bonfire. It's a family event. It's for kids. There's no drink allowed at it, and she's determined to keep that within the community rather than paramilitaries take over the bonfires. And she says it's going to be a very small bonfire this year because we don't have an awful lot of pallets. And a woman sitting facing her who is from a Republican area said, "I have pallets." I'm sitting here going,
Thank you very much.
"Yeah, I have pallets." So within 5 minutes, the phone call was made and our down has donated pallets to the bonfire. And that's good relations and peace building, that I say.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Nicole, I'll come to you without being biased with time. We have to really stick it to a minute and 30
Set a
seconds.
timer, it's okay.
30 seconds.
Nicole, first of all, I'd like to say well done to all the work you do with being a young person yourself and working with young people and being a champion amongst young people. And we did listen to all of the things the young people are saying, but I'd just like to ask, in your work with them, do they see any positives that have come out of the agreement in this past years? I know that there are a lot of things that still needs to, real work is needed basically, but do they see any positives at all, in your work with young people? Keep it to a minute and a half.
No worries. Yeah, from our conversations that we had around peace building and the outcomes of the Good Friday Agreement, I suppose a lot of the answers in terms of the positive impacts were around that conversation on violence primarily, and looking at how that is not as present in our communities. Now, of course, there are communities that still have it and there's still a lot of work to be done, but at this point in time, they see a massive, obviously, reduction in that. So I think that's primarily where the conversation orientated around was the presence of conflict, the presence of that war-torn society that we were living in. But I think that's probably one of the few, on top of maybe integrated education as well, one of the few benefits that they talked about from it. Now, there is, of course, the rise of young people identifying as being Northern Irish and embracing both British and Irish identities. I personally would factor myself as one of those, and taking the conflict and taking the politics out of the question, it's just a question over location for me. Like, yes, I've embraced both traditions, both cultures, and that's something that I'm working towards. And I think that was definitely born out of my exposure to integrated education and the opportunities that brought forward. So there is an opportunity in the sense of identity, in the sense of education, and in the sense of the lack of sort of as obvious violence on the streets. But beyond that, I think there's significant pieces of work to be done that everybody else in this panel have referred to as well. So that's really a summary of what they discussed at those events.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. A girl after my own heart. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Dr. Caroline, I'd like to come to you. You did speak about the new Irish woman participation, inclusion, which it's basically what we've all been talking about, the various diverse voices, whether you're talking about the migrant women, traveler women, like we've seen, from our audience online, or women with disability, youth, the young people, that diverse voices. What do you think, Caroline, in your work and with your experience are the barriers to women's involvement, especially those new Irish women that you mentioned that are coming from conflict zones?
Thank you very much. That's
In a minute and a half, please.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jennifer. And there are so many barriers, these which hinder these women from fully participating. And it's just imagine like you're somewhere, you're new, you're leaving your life behind, that you're starting a new life, and even you don't know, for example, even how to navigate some of the simplest things, maybe which other people just do, like even with their eyes closed. So these women have to start from scratch, finding their way like toddlers. And so that's why I say that they need people to hold their hands. And so it's about those baby steps, holding their hands until maybe they can say something like, "Mommy, I can walk now, and let me follow you," or "just show me the way." And it's about those baby steps, because they have to navigate so many issues, language, everything. They have to find their way. And I remember when I came to Ireland 17 years ago, I would just be 30 seconds. My mother told me, I talked to her one day on the phone, and I told her, "You will not have problems in integrating, because you studied away from home. You've studied away from home before, because I went to Uganda from Kenya." And then I kept quiet. I told my mother, "No, this is a whole new ball game." Because my mother taught English in Kenya, but when I came here, it's not the English we speak. I mean, it's, and even as she visited, and she was like, "Yeah, I have to listen very well, because it's not the English she taught, So like there are so many things, small, it may look small to somebody, but to somebody else coming from somewhere else, they mean so much. I think it's about that, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caroline. So this brings our morning event to a close. Enormous thank you, a round of applause again to all our panelists for your participation and contributions. So in conclusion, I'd like to say this event has been a significant reminder to us all on the importance of hearing those voices that have maintained peace in our communities over the past 25 years. And we look forward to moving forward together into a future on this island where voices are represented, because it's very important. This meeting is now closed. We invite our forum members to take a 15 minutes break, and then we will reconvene here in the next 15-20 minutes. But more importantly, many thanks to our guests who have attended today. Thank you. And those of you who have joined us online, we really appreciate you joining us, and we hope to see you soon again. Thank you very much.